Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Civic Life Lunch, the Massachusetts Model Bipartisanship on Beacon Hill. My name is Jane Romp, and I'm a senior here at Tufts, majoring in political science, civic studies, and sociology. I've had the honor of working with representatives on Beacon Hill before as an intern for Common Cause Massachusetts and the Foundation of Civic Leadership, so it's my pleasure to kick off today's event and welcome our guest speakers to Tufts. We are so grateful for the support of our wonderful co-sponsors today, including the Political Science Department, Tufts Action, Tufts Civic, the Democrats, and Tufts Republicans. Tisch College has made many events and civic leaders visiting this spring. On Tuesday, March 28th at 5:30 p.m., they're hosting the Supreme Court reporter and author of Lady Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America, Dahlia Lithwick, for a Solomon Speaker Series event. You can find out more information and register for that event or any others by visiting tischcollege.tufts.edu/events. For folks in the Zoom room today, there's going to be an opportunity for you to ask questions during the event. If you have a question at any point, please submit them via chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Tisch staff will do their best to get as many of your questions answered as possible. Now, I would like to briefly introduce today's guests and moderator before we dive into our discussion. Representative Tackey Chan serves Norfolk's 2nd District, serving his home city of Quincy. He was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 2010, becoming one of the first Asian Americans in the House, as well as the first Asian American and minority elected to office by the city of Quincy. Representative Chan is a member of the Democratic Party. Next, Representative Marcus Vaughn serves Norfolk's 9th District and was elected in 2022. The first in his family to go to college, Representative Vaughn has a Bachelor of Arts from Syracuse University and a Master's of Business Administration from California State University, Monterey Bay. He is a member of the Republican Party. Our final guest, Katherine Holahan, served as Legislative Director and Deputy Chief of Staff for Legislative Affairs for Governor Charles Baker and Lieutenant Governor Catherine Polito from 2019 to 2023. Prior to that, she was Vice President of Government Affairs at Associated Industries of Massachusetts, Legislative Director for the House Ways and Means Committee, and spent 7 years in the office of Massachusetts House Minority Leader. She holds a bachelor's degree from Fairfield University and a master's from Boston College. Moderating today's conversation is Tufts' own Samuel Gebru. Professor Gebru is a senior advisor at DeWitt Impact Group and a professor of the practice of political science at the School of Arts and Sciences here at Tufts. This semester, he's teaching a course in decoding state government and policy. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming today's guest speakers and moderator.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jane. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to be here on this rainy day with all of you. Was really hoping to do this in person, but here we are. We're here to discuss bipartisanship, particularly in the Massachusetts context. The founding fathers feared partisan politics, which they referred to as factions, but they also saw political parties as a necessary evil. While some, like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, saw these factions as being a fatal flaw, others, like Thomas Jefferson, had a more open mind, arguing that people naturally align themselves based on their opinions. Early on in the formation of the American Republic, stark political alignments emerged, and the first political parties were formed. As he left office, President George Washington warned Americans of the divisive influence of factions, arguing that it is, quote, in the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it, unquote. Fast forward, here we are. The United States has now 2 major parties that dominate politics and government at all levels. We've seen throughout history strong moments of bipartisanship and bitter moments of division, fear, hate, and even civil war. During this hour, we will look at how partisanship or bipartisanship plays out in Massachusetts, which is not only home to the 2nd oldest democratic deliberative assembly in the world, but also home to the oldest continuously surviving democratic governing document. Thank you to Representative Tackey Chan, Representative Marcus Vaughn, and Katherine Holahan for joining us today. The overarching question that we're going to try to answer today is bipartisanship possible? With that, my first question to the 3 of you, I'll start with you, Representative Chan, first. In your own words, what does bipartisanship mean to you? Feel free to draw on an example in your time as an elected official or as a staffer or as a committee chair right now.
Well, thank you for having me here, Professor, and great to see my colleagues, Representative Vaughn, a former colleague, Katie over there, who's had to put up with me so many years in many different capacities, and best wishes in your current capacity now. Bipartisanship to me is obviously very simply, dual party system to try to come to agreement with two parties, whether it be within the legislature or with the executive branch, but also remind folks that there's no monolith in political parties, so it's monoliths in people. And as a result, we always have disagreements among ourselves relative geography, constituencies, different philosophies, different special interest groups, and we still have to work to somehow get forward representing not necessarily ourselves at Beacon Hill, but the people we represent at home. And, as a person of color who sometimes people forget is a minority group in Massachusetts, it's actually an interesting struggle to work towards a greater awareness with all parties about our issues and our own life's experiences that we bring to Beacon Hill. So, in a macro level, I agree. I mean, bipartisanship is between political parties. But once you drill down into the actual engagement between human beings, we are still ourselves with our different opinions and the people we work for. And even overcoming my own individual biases is very important as an individual to be able to move forward and work together.
Thank you. Representative Vaughn, same question. What does bipartisanship mean to you?
Yes, thank you. So bipartisanship is essential, especially in the politicization that we live in today. It's an essential component of our democracy. I truly believe that. I think it's very difficult to achieve in this politicized environment, but there have been numerous instances throughout history that we can contend to where, both parties have come together to pass legislation and address important issues, facing our country and more specifically here in our Commonwealth. We can look to, certain examples on bipartisan efforts between both parties in recent history, like the Affordable Care Act, Dodd-Frank, Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which is, of high visibility today with the banking situation that we're in, and, the American Rescue, Plan Act and COVID rescue. These efforts are facilitated by a number of factors, such as shared values on both sides and mutual respect that, myself on the Republican side and Representative Chan and others, my other colleagues on the Democratic side, and having that willingness to compromise, I think, is essential to make sure that we can achieve bipartisanship and serve the people as a whole, and their voices are heard, through our efforts.
Thank you. And Katie, same question to you. What does bipartisanship mean to you?
Thank you, Samuel. I did want to say a quick thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be here, especially with two wonderful representatives. And I'm thrilled that anyone wants to hear my perspective on any of this. Probably one of the few only other people I could talk to about this kind of stuff is Representative Chan. We could talk about this for hours, and probably have over the years. But I would actually like to build on what Representative Chan said about bipartisanship certainly being a function of political parties. That's an integral way to have it expressed, to have the function of it occur. But I agree that it's more than just political parties because of ideologies, because of biases. I think of it more as diversity, meaning diversity of perspectives and experience, and engagement. Because of course, the big issue in any government, whether you're in Massachusetts with a supermajority party in power, or in another state, with or without a supermajority in power, engagement is the key. If we do not have engagement of diverse people, of diverse experiences, of diverse perspectives, then that function of bipartisanship just can't fully exist. And just really quickly, I would say I've had the privilege of worked on Beacon Hill for 18 years in different capacities, for about 13 or 14 in the legislature and in the executive branch. And I had the incredible honor of working for both Republican leadership and Democratic leadership. And most people are surprised by that, but it really comes down to, I worked for the House Republican leader, Brad Jones, for about 7 years. And because Republicans are guaranteed a seat at the table for important meetings, important functions like conference committees when you're working out a piece of legislation, that meant that I was always staffing a Republican in the room. And I got access to these incredible meetings, incredible opportunities where I got to know everyone, they got to know me. And once you have that familiarity and you know, okay, this person knows what they're doing, they're a pretty good person, political party matters less. I've always been unenrolled. I will always be unenrolled. I love being unenrolled. But that facilitated me working for both sides of the aisle, just working for good people who actually politically weren't that far off. So I'll end there.
Yeah, I appreciate, all three of you have emphasized a point that I like to bring up a lot, whether it's to my students or to people just in the wider public. Relationships matter a lot. Who you know matters, and more importantly, as a friend of mine corrected me the other day, who knows you even matters more, right? And when you're in the legislature here in Massachusetts, or in any state legislature, or even in the United States Congress, when you're on the floor, those opportunities to talk to each other, to engage with each other, or even, to visit someone else's district, to bond over shared experiences and shared upbringings and whatnot, those little moments of relationship building when it comes time to the actual policy work, it makes it a little easier. Representative Vaughn, you brought up COVID with ARPA funds, and I have a question for all of you, and I want to start with you. So during the height of COVID-19, we saw strong levels of bipartisanship, as you said, right? So at the state level, and dare I say even at the federal level, we saw strong levels of bipartisanship. Politicians were working with each other across parties and across various levels, whether it was mayors and city managers, all the way up to the White House. COVID-19 also exacerbated many of the socioeconomic challenges that have persisted throughout Massachusetts and our country. So what were you doing during the outbreak and the height of the pandemic? As a newly elected official, you obviously weren't elected then, but as a business member, as a community member, what were you doing at the height of the pandemic? And how did the public health emergency impact your politics?
Yes, so as a small business owner, it was particularly very difficult for us to get anything done, and we were kind of left in the ways of figuring out where our business was heading, where our partners stood, vendors that we were working with, and obviously the heightened, exacerbated, the products that we were taking into account and bringing over, from Europe and actually down in Mexico. We just weren't able to get to our customers. On another level, my family, my wife's a teacher in Foxborough. My kids are in the public school system. Just seeing that day-to-day interaction between my wife having to, do virtual sessions with her students, my kids, luckily for us, being very blessed, having a teacher in the household, and my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law in the household being able to still continue those lessons from our household while the world was kind of in shambles. I saw a lot on the surface dealing with my wife's students not having that same support system from different households. So that really, got me engaged more into politics and more into helping people. Was very involved with a lot of local programs to help people get through the pandemic, both on small business side and just socioeconomic side, to make sure, people that were less fortunate, in this district and across the Commonwealth, had someone to lean on and had the proper, resources available to them. So yeah, that's where I stood during the pandemic, and very, very passionate as far as continuing those efforts, because we're not out of it yet, and there's still a lot of remnants because of it across many different levels. And hopefully we as bipartisan individuals can enact change to make sure we, as a Commonwealth, as Bay Staters, get back on track, in the very near future.
Thank you. Just building on that, Katie, you were in the belly of the beast at the height of the pandemic, working in the office of Governor Baker as his deputy chief of staff for legislative affairs, meaning that you were engaging with legislators like Representative Chan, and the legislature gave you all broad authority at the height of the pandemic, based on the public health emergency, to be able to do the necessary things, whether it was to close down the Commonwealth, or whether it was on evictions or something else. Would love for you to share your experiences. What were you doing during the outbreak and the height of the pandemic, and how did all of that impact your politics?
It is honestly hard to think back to that time because it's so overwhelming. I joined the governor's office, his senior staff, 3 months before the pandemic. So you know how it is when you just join a job and you're learning everybody's names still, and then all of a sudden, the world shut down. I think I would say we had the governor had some authority existing already through some emergency statutes to implement certain aspects of oversight. But this was the first time we were doing all of this. It was an incredibly intense time. I learned how to multitask, as I never thought a human being could multitask. I would be on a Zoom meeting with 2 phones going at the same time. This was, I mean, at that point, it was probably 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. It settled down into a manageable 15 hours a day, 6 days a week for the next year and a half. So that got pretty easy. No, but, overall, we were incredibly lucky in Massachusetts. Of course, we have a very high opinion of ourselves. We have wonderful healthcare and educational resources. We believe things like science. And I would say what the pandemic really taught me, and it just emphasized it so clearly, and I'm not going to put this into words as well as it should be, but that there are people who work in government who are such incredibly dedicated public servants. And those are the people on whose backs we survive and hopefully thrive. But in those times it was survive. There are so many people that, I couldn't even come up with all the names, who just worked themselves so hard and would not have considered at any point giving up or stopping, because public service to them is such a vital thing, vital to our democracy. And I think of that as certainly the legislators, the staff who are receiving so much incoming from the residents of the Commonwealth, and the members of the administration. If you think healthcare, education, teachers are technically public employees, and they had an incredibly difficult time that they were going through. And I contrast that. I will tell just one quick story that is actually hard for me to think about because it was so emotionally wrought. But I always think back to March and April of 2020, where there was so much about COVID we didn't know. And we were scrambling, everyone was scrambling to source PPE. And we were so terrified as what would happen if we can't get this just for our healthcare workers. Just start with them. Because, of course, we were seeing at the time the horrible things that were happening in certain parts of Europe, all over the globe. And so we, in March, secured, and I say we, the Commonwealth, secured 3 million masks. I think we bought them from BJ's. They came into the port of New York, and the federal government does not admit this was the reason, but our governor had been critical of the president in the previous few weeks, and the 3 million masks were seized by the federal government. And through that time, the federal government was also sending out supplies from their stockpile. Certain states, Florida might be one example, had 100% of their requests to the federal government fulfilled. Massachusetts, coincidentally, had only 17% of our requests fulfilled. So to have all of that is to say, to have this really scary experience where we really didn't know what was going on, to be working so hard to try to provide what at the time was just basic protections for the people who needed it the most, and to have such overwhelming bipartisan support within Massachusetts, and to have that direct contrast on the federal level, it just reinforced for me how incredibly vital the people are who believe in public service as an actual service, not as performative politics.
I appreciate that. You know, I remember it getting so bad that Bob Kraft had to fly in the Patriots plane with PPE at one point. Representative Chan.
It was a very happy day for us. It was a very happy day.
Oh yeah, it was all over the news. Talk about public-private partnership. So Representative Chen, same question for you. You know, you were in the legislature, which was dramatically impacted by COVID-19 in various ways, even down to the way that you all conduct your meetings and hearings. Things have just changed. The legislative packages that you all were voting on last session. Could you share a bit about what you were doing during the outbreak and the height of the pandemic, and how that impacted?
We could be here all day talking about just 2 months in 2020. I mean, it was unprecedented. I mean, I'm one of those guys who've been around so long, and Katie as well, where we're very dependent on institutional knowledge. If you've seen it once, some variation is going to show up again. And you get to COVID-19, and I've never seen or read or heard a story or anything like that before. So this is the time to improvise and rely on experience and education and to figure it out. And, I was looking at my calendar. I mean, on March 12th, we were out on front of the State House with various Asian leaders, reminding folks that this is not going to go well for the Asian community with a disease coming out of China. We remember SARS, remember avian flu, and the huge negative repercussions in this country and Asian community. And people seem to forget very quickly, but the scars remain in our end. And not surprising, between BLM and Asian hate and so forth, a lot of other factors came into 2020 beyond just the coronavirus, of which some of it stemmed from it and some of it did not. So we're navigating a lot of issues, but, Katie's correct. I mean, in March, we shut the place down, and in April, everyone was lost and scared. My office, consumer protection, professional relations, my committee I'm on, we had to rapidly move our stuff to the Google Drives. We discovered Zoom for the first time in our lives. We had to learn how to use Zoom to conduct public hearings, engage our committee members. And then you have, quite frankly, a lot of scared people, and people get scared, they get angry. People forget that sometimes. And we were very patient, and we were scared too. Don't get us wrong. We're taking phone calls from a lot of scared people. I got senior housing with infection rates. I also have a assisted care facility in the middle of a meltdown situation. I live with my mom who's immune compromised. So I had to secure the home in the sense that we're not seeing anybody until we figure what's going on. 5 weeks of food in the freezer. The same thing everyone else goes through in this call. Elected officials are no different. We're not folks that have servants that go get our stuff. I'm out there on the phone negotiating with the package stores and the restaurants while desperately trying to get my groceries, wearing a mask, gloves, and, looking like, completely packaged in. His family comes from Hong Kong. We know what SARS was. We know what avian flu does to people. So, in the Chinese community, especially those from Southeast Asia, there was a real heightened awareness. And we had a second heightened awareness of the fact that hate is coming and it's going to be ugly. Whether people notice it happening is another matter. But, we had a lot of things going on. But in the near term, and Katie will tell you, 20,000 people lost their jobs in 7 days. They couldn't get to unemployment. It was not designed for that. And our office is inundated by hundreds of calls and emails of scared people. Legit scared people. And, I thank my staff, especially on the patience and their compassion and, the ability to weather through all this, because we have to work together as a group to take care of our constituents. And same thing with my delegation, Speaker Mariano, John Keane, my senator, and Bruce Harris, my other colleague in Quincy, and as well as the city government, trying to navigate this all together. And, we provide a unified voice behind the governor, because the governor's leading this, as we also all share similar experiences regarding scared constituencies and, quite frankly, dying constituents. I have lost more people I knew in 3 months than 30 years during COVID. And some people I didn't know died for 9 months because news traveled differently. Social media is all inundated, And even my local papers couldn't get news out properly. And it's sad that you can't do anything about it when people pass. And, some people I may not know really well, but I know where they live and I know they're gone now and COVID got them and we don't know how to stop it. So it was depressing. I won't lie. There was a lot of depression going on because there's only so much death you can look at, particularly death that people because you've seen their faces, you met their families, you shook their hand. And it's an awful time to have that feeling. And I've been around for a lot of crazy things over the years. And also the briefings. We never got good news ever. And Katie was on many of these calls too. I mean, from the hospitals, biotech, the doctors, it was just death count, death count, death count. And, and thankfully we live in Massachusetts. Higher education is great here. Medicine's great here. But I mean, we're trying to find masks for senior housing complexes, how to reach out to various community groups, get these donations in. And yeah, I mean, it's something we never experienced, hope to never experience again. But I mean, I was around for the Boston bombing back in April. I was around during 9/11. So, I mean, I actually know kind of what happens during terrorist attacks in Massachusetts, but, COVID was special. And some of our colleagues in government left government. The pressure of being a mayor, town manager, board of selectmen, but also legislators who decided that family comes first now in a time period where, we give so much ourselves and our lives to people. We had a whole new balancing act. I think the public wasn't quite appreciative of the amount of work we had to even keep our own family safe. Again, my mom's been compromised. I mean, I kept her trapped in the house and, we didn't see any other human come near us until September.
I appreciate that. Thank you. The reality is, we were benefited by being in Massachusetts with enormous opportunities in infrastructure here, but to Rep. Vaughn's point, many challenges persisted, and we did see extreme levels of cooperation, which was encouraging. Even me and Katie, we got to get to know each other through all of that work, although we still haven't met in person. I have a question for you, Katie, that builds off of what was just said, and obviously it's for all three of you, but we'll start with Katie. Some would argue in a place like Massachusetts that bipartisanship isn't really necessary, given that Democrats have a veto-proof supermajority in the House and in the Senate. But we do see many examples of Democrats and Republicans often working together, particularly between the Democratic-held legislature and the often Republican-held governorship. Right now, we're in this sort of unique period where all three bodies are Democrat-held, but that isn't always the case. And would love for you to just reflect a little bit on how you see these dynamics playing out, having worked in the legislature, having worked in the executive branch for Democrats and Republicans. So you've sort of seen it on all sides. What really does happen? How is the sort of proverbial sausage? How is it all made?
Oh man, that would take hours and would probably be very boring to most people. Fascinating to nerds like us, but yeah, and I was also in the legislature for, most of my time in the legislature. Deval Patrick was governor, so it was again, the two chambers and the executive branch were all Democratic. I see a lot of value to having, I certainly understand there's a supermajority of Democrats in Massachusetts. Because of that, I see a lot of value in having another party as a balance, because that does put more onus on those who are in charge to listen to diverse opinions. If and the thing that pops into my head immediately as sort of what I thought was one of the best examples of that from my time on Beacon Hill was the police certification bill, creating a process for certifying, making sure peace officers, as we called it, were trained, received appropriate training, were certified, had to recertify, and were also tracked so that if there were any problems, you're not having a situation where someone is getting fired from one police department and going to another community and getting hired there. Seems pretty reasonable. That was actually a topic that, believe it or not, Governor Baker had been working on with the Black and Latino Caucus for years. And actually the Black and Latino Caucus, which is a pretty active group, and the governor met with them regularly, as well as the Asian Caucus and the Women's Caucus. But specifically with the Black and Latino Caucus, they were working on a piece of legislation that was supposed to be released in June of 2020. As you can imagine, that went that went the way of everything else once COVID hit. But obviously it was a topic that both sides determined was important. No question, this is going to be important. And I think that's the key with bipartisanship, you know, and I have no experience in Washington, so I'm making this up, but it seems to me in Washington, what the constant problem is, they don't talk to one another and they don't admit. So one group will say, well, this is important. The other group will say, no, it's not. And then nothing gets done because they won't even talk about it. And I think that's one of the benefits to actually forcing people to work with one another. In Massachusetts, for the police certification bill, Democrats didn't have a veto-proof majority. Even the Democratic Party was split, quite a few different perspectives within it. But what that meant is the process had to slow down a little bit, not significantly. It was still a priority and it got done pretty quickly. I think Representative Chan, I think you'd agree with that. But there were some really diverse opinions and they all had to be taken into account because there was no veto-proof majority. And nobody got everything that they wanted. That's not the way democracy and legislation is supposed to work. But I think what they started with was the bill produced by the Black and Latino Caucus and Governor Baker. And what they ended with, it's not going to be perfect, of course, but we're also first in the nation with this kind of program. So there's going to be things that we need to work out. But it was a hell of a lot better than anything that was going to be produced from one perspective, from one single perspective. So I think that's the value. There are those sort of key moments. They're very few and far between in any state with a supermajority of one party. But I think those moments for me are what illustrates how important it is, not just to sort of have bipartisanship in theory, but in actual fact, in application.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that example. The post commission, which was sort of the product of that legislation, truly groundbreaking, and great work on that. Representative Vaughn, you were nodding your head. I saw you nodding your head to what Katie was saying, and I know you're a member of the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus. I think you all just met with Governor Healy yesterday.
Yes, we just had a meeting with Governor Healy and LT yesterday, and I mean, I'm very thankful, Governor Baker setting that into motion, and I think a lot of positive things will come from that, not only meeting with our caucus, but the Asian Caucus, Women's Caucus, and that sort of bipartisanship and voice within particular caucuses and groups will carry on for quite some time. At the end of the day, I think a majority of Bay Staters, they want to see representation from both sides, come to the table and to the aisle, to be that voice of the people. And it's our duty, obviously, with Governor Healy. I have the utmost faith that she's going to continue along with her cabinet to work, alongside the other side of the aisle to get things done and listen to our concerns. And I think that's how it should be. And like I said, I have full faith in her administration that she'll continue to govern like the past administration did to, see forth so many great, ideas and legislation priorities that we got done within his 8 years of being governor and working together with both House and Senate.
if you could take a minute just to share, what is one thing that you really want to get done this session that you see yourself possibly working with the Healy administration on, with the Democrats on?
Yes, so one of my biggest priorities right now centers alongside MSBA funding. 50 years ago, the state actually built out a lot of our technical and vocational schools on the state's dime. The cities and towns weren't tasked to pay for any of these schools, and now they're all coming up as far as being refurbished and needing to be rebuilt and up to certain standards and codes. And obviously with COVID-19 and the exacerbation of heightened prices on everything and building supplies, our funding is inadequate to continue the build out of these institutions, of these buildings for our children. So I'm really looking at prioritizing, taking a look and feasibility studies at making sure that we have available funds to help alleviate some of the costs associated that is a burden to a lot of the towns. I mean, just for instance, the technical vocational school in my district houses 11 communities, 6 of which are affected in my district, which they are already under severe constraints with their budgets, with other municipality projects coming online, and even a $700,000 to $1.5 million cost associated with building another school outside of their district year after year really puts a strain on social services that we're seeing today. I mean, many of our schools in district really can't support a lot of the social services that we need and mental health services that we really need coming out of COVID. So really putting a significant onus on that budget and increasing the budget and taking a look at what we can do to help fund those outside educational facilities outside of the districts that we serve is very important to me.
Thank you. Representative Chan, as member of the majority party, you're also chairman of a committee that typically has to sort of take a sort of a bipartisan approach to a lot of these things. A lot of the issues that are before your committee are very technical in nature. It's not really sort of one way or another, may not be able to be seen through the lens of a party, but really just sort of from a subject matter perspective. And I could be wrong here, but would love to get your thoughts on what does bipartisanship and these political dynamics look like for you as a member of the majority party, as a committee chair, but also seeking input from the minority members, not only on your committee, but in the legislature as a whole, and having just dealt with 8 years of the Baker-Polito administration. How are those dynamics?
So we're starting to move into the segment of the program where I'm going to get myself in trouble, depending what story I decide to tell. And those of us that have dealt with tacky stories know what I'm talking about. So let's put a little age on me at this point. I was around when the Senate, Republicans in the Senate could stop a veto override. That's how long I've been around. And I've watched the Republican Party shrink to 16, and my class added 20 in 2011. So it was the largest group of Republicans in 2011. First time more Republicans and Democrats in a freshman class was 2011. The largest class of 41 since the 1991 class of 54. So that, so I've been around for one or two things. And the dynamics, as you point out, is interesting because in my case, it's a joint committee. So it's the House and the Senate chairs have to agree on moving something. And the House has more membership because of the size of the body. Not surprising, we have fights between the House and the Senate. You read in the Globe all the time. And of course, this erupts into fights with the governor, right? And it doesn't matter what party the governor is, believe me, it's the battle between the branches and the separation of powers. And we're all co-equals in government. And sometimes one of the branches forgets we're co-equal in government. And that becomes a dilemma for all of us.
Which branch forgets?
Well, from my standpoint, it's all the other ones.
We'll blame the judiciary because they're not represented in this call today. We'll blame them.
Well, we can talk about them and changing the signature paper minimum requirement law back in 2020, even though they had no statutory authority to do that. So they created their own emergency powers on their own. Again, we could be here all day. I could cause problems for a lot of folks, including myself. But I mean, I'll give you an example of a situation where a veto not getting voter proof is a problem for the legislature. It's the casino bill. Senator Terry Murray could not achieve a veto-proof majority in the Senate with the Democratic caucus. The Republicans were with the casino bill, but the Democrats were not. As a result, Deval Patrick had enormous power on drafting that piece of legislation. And while we are a super Democrat majority, you still got to get all your folks in the same boat when you craft legislation to ensure you can maintain your veto-proof majority. And this includes veto overriding. So in the case of the budget, for example, and other line item budget situations, you got to get all your guys in. And if the governor starts rejecting things by line of veto or whole bills, well, the agreement in the caucus was we're going to do this. So we got to send it back up, whether we like it or not. And, and believe it or not, Republicans vote on a lot of veto overrides, especially when it comes to their earmarks. No Republican has voted against their earmark veto. I can tell you that much. And of course, the Democrat Party has no problem letting it go, because why would we deny anybody the ability to get money back home to their community? We're not like that. Even when the Republican Party shrank to a small number, we changed the rules. Democrats changed the rules to ensure that Republicans can call a roll call. They got so small that fell below the 20% threshold to be able to call roll call. So then we changed the threshold lower to ensure the Republicans' ability to roll call the chambers to get a vote. So, it isn't as if, we are the supermajority. Okay, let's not pretend here. We can do a lot of stuff, but we still have to maintain, the ability for the minority party to get their voice out, to be heard, the ability to participate in government, to hold the Democrats accountable, ensuring there's an opposing voice. And even among Republicans, they have internal voice differences themselves. We're very aware of that too. And Leader Jones and the Leader Tar, Leader Tar is one of three. So I call it kind of like sit at the bar and with a phone booth and they can figure it out. But obviously, Leader Jones has more members, and he's got to be able to keep everybody on the same ship as well. And that's part of it. And in the case of committee work, I have a special situation we refer to as home rule petitions. Under the Constitution, municipalities can file requests to be exempted by the general laws, or create special laws for themselves, and also charter changes. And Representative Vaughn's going to find out very quickly about home rule petitions, because his district has a lot of them, and mine includes alcohol bills. And regardless of what political party, what party to state you're from, we apply a uniform policy of review. We set a specific set of questions. We do an accountability of how many quota licenses are available. We take into account whether or not there's a real economic development. We want to ensure that these things are used. We don't want to diminish the value of remaining licenses. This is a uniform policy. It's not a special policy for anybody else. And I will tell you right up front, people like to play shenanigans with me once the bill leaves my committee, and I will catch you, and I will make sure that you follow the committee policy. And everyone's treated equally in this policy, and the committee chairs and committee staff do our best on trying to figure out how to get you where you needed to go to help you out. And my committee staff, my whole staff, not just my committee, so my whole staff is accessible to anybody at the State House who needs assistance. I understand Rep. Vaughn has an office now, but it offer lets people say, hey, if you need a space, private space for a while, call my staff, make it a schedule if no one's there, and go ahead and use it. I don't care. Whoever wants to. And I'll give you another quick example that's going to get me in trouble. So, we did.
I agree with that, Representative Chan. I say it's the people's office, not so much my office.
Oh, absolutely. We like to be helpful. It's good. My goal is to help people go along, not to make it more difficult necessarily. I'll give you another fun one that's going to get me in trouble. So during COVID, we did a healthcare equity commission study. And this bill was submitted by House leadership, put on the floor in an informal session, which requires unanimous vote to get out. The Republicans objected. And the reason he objected is because my colleague Donald Wong, who's also Republican in that instance, the Republicans rejected because Asian Americans weren't part of the Health Equity Commission. So I get a call from the speaker's office, Speaker DeLeo's office, going, hey, we need a little help. I'm like, well, what's the problem? I hear that you left us out. Asians aren't participating in Health Equity Commission. And he goes, well, we need some help getting Republicans, out of this. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to lift the hold. I'm going to tell them to keep stopping this thing to add us onto the list. And that's the bottom line. And they're like, well, it'll be an even number. We have to get an odd number. I'm like, well, that's not my problem. You don't want to let this over consulting me. And my good friends on the other side of the aisle caught it and stopped it. So if you expect me to make a phone call over to my friends across the aisle to lift the hold, it ain't happening until we come to a solution. And that's partially because of Representative Wong as well as being, a member of the Republican Party and, our advocacy, as an Asian caucus to bring greater awareness about ourselves. And to be honest, I mean, we're just helpful too. I mean, we're not difficult of other people. And we try to be, good colleagues to everybody. And I can't promise everybody's a good colleague because, people are people. But, there's a little example of how, working together and looking out for each other really does happen in the place that people think all we do is cause problems and attack each other if you read the papers.
Thank you. Very funny stories. Hopefully none of them get you in trouble. My last question. So we've seen and this sort of ties into something all three of you have touched on, and it's sort of becoming more prominent now in Massachusetts politics, of course. So we've seen a sizable growth in the amount of women and people of color getting elected in Massachusetts and serving in senior staff positions as well. At Tisch College of Civic Life, we are committed to building a multiracial democracy, a multicultural democracy where people of all identities and backgrounds are embraced and tolerated. There are now 33 legislators of color out of 200, which is a first for the Commonwealth. There is now a woman and an openly lesbian elected governor of Massachusetts. What is the intersection between your identity and your politics? How much do your identity, your upbringing, family inform your politics? I know Representative Chan just touched on that a bit. I want to start with you, Katie, and then I want to go across.
I think it's a wonderful question. I don't see how anyone could ever think that their identity doesn't immediately affect, influence their politics. I think the experience for me, the experience of working in the State House has taught me that while identity is certainly important, of course, it helps to lay the foundation of your beliefs, your understanding of the world, your understanding of yourself in the world. I think experience is actually, I think, an even better, more expansive way to think of how you should shape your politics. Because if you think of just identity, certainly it's vital. Your personal experience, your family's experience, all of those things are vital pieces. I have found, I went into working at the State House. It wasn't something I planned. I didn't think I would have any sort of career in public service or politics. And I went in there, of course, thinking certain things about Democrats and certain things about Republicans. And some of those were affirmed, but many of them were just destroyed from the ground up. And I had to kind of reconstitute them based on my experience of interacting with all of these different people, all of these different situations and scenarios. And I think that is even more vital because it not only, and when I say that, I mean thinking of experience or ensuring that your experience, your world experience, your life experience is diverse enough that it can inform your political perspective. Because it's one thing to have an idea, to have a philosophy. It's another thing to interact with someone who doesn't agree with that philosophy and challenges your philosophy. That might reaffirm your belief and you don't change it, and that's fine. But there might be ways that your belief is reaffirmed and your belief is changed. And I think that's what I experienced in my time in public service. And I think, so I would say identity is incredibly important and should not be discounted, but your experience being that particular identity and interacting with other identities is what I would hope people would use to ground their political beliefs, to inform their political beliefs, because the whole point, especially in a democracy, is interacting with other people, is experiencing other beliefs.
Rep. Chan, would you agree?
You better
Oh,
say
yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean, Katie's absolutely correct. It's not just, you know, it's not just where you're from and what you look like, it's who you are. And Katie's absolutely correct. I mean, it's not just the electeds, but also among the staffs and what you bring to the table. I mean, when I first got to the State House in 95, I mean, there was only 2 Asian staffers, me and Leverett Wing, and there was 0 people that looked like me. And almost nobody in the administration, regardless of political party, you will find many Asians at high level positions. I can, name people like Dan Coe, but, now we have Secretary Howe, but you can't name that many. We had Secretary Chan, I'm sorry, for Outer Affairs also. So you can count on your hand how many Asians rise to that level of position. And it shapes a lot of how I bring to myself this sale as well. I mean, I grew up in a non-Asian community in Quincy, a very different Quincy I remind all the time when I grew up versus a large minority community in Quincy now. My family was not political. This is something I brought onto myself at Brandeis University because I discovered I was good at that, and I decided that I will make my degree work for me somehow. And here I am to prove that your degree can work for you. Put the effort into it. And it was not anticipated. I didn't plan this in life, and it just happened to be there. And I've been working at the same address essentially for most of my adult life. And if I get a different job, I don't know how to get to work. I mean, that's kind of where I am. So, but I mean, your personal lives make a big difference. And Pat Haddad said this best to me, Representative Haddad, when we were running Asian events for the first time Korean Day, first time China Day, first time a lot of these folks have never been to the State House ever came. And Pat said that, I, myself and Donald brought a new element to the State House that wasn't there before. And she's right. Every person that comes in, no matter where they're from, brings a new element to the State House that we did not know before, and brings that life experience as well, and their upbringing, and their biases, and their kindness, and their compassion. You get the whole package of a human, good and bad, into the State House, and from there expands the State House's ability to review public policy, to engage constituencies, to hear voices that have been heard before. Expansion of people of color is essential, and some of them are immigrants and refugees now. I mean, my colleagues, Representative Mom, Howard, and Wynn all come from refugee families, not just immigrant families, people who are displaced from their home countries. A very different conversation than just immigration. But also the fact that, I have a lot of faith moving forward because these folks are much younger than I am, that will have strong leadership among women, but also people of color moving forward. And I am aging, as Katie more than anyone else aware of. I do think a lot about now what the future of the State House for people of color to represent all people of color, not just a segment of people of color, because how elections work, you don't know what you're going to get.
Well, if I can build on that, Rep. Vaughn, Rep. Chen just sort of opened the door to this as well. All people of color, including Black Republicans. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, just to build upon Rep. Chen and Katherine's experiences and how they feel, our personal experiences and perspectives shape our beliefs and values, and I think in turn it informs the political views and actions that we bring into the State House, including our race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. It can all influence how we perceive and experience the world. I've been very blessed, again, growing up in a predominantly white, district and town in North Attleboro, but having equal experiences in the Boston area. My family, my grandfather has a park named after him downtown Boston in Eggleston Square. Spent, a majority of my childhood in situations where, I was, constantly around, marginalized communities, downtown Boston, and my grandfather being a staple in that community and uplifting the community and prioritizing, social justice issues, I think shaped who I am today. But on the other side, I had a family that, a very large family that were small business owners, worked for everything that they got and received, and were able to give back to the communities that they served. And that's kind of how I live my life today. Obviously growing up in a barbershop, there's a lot of political conversations that you hear as a very young child, but again, Black and brown people are not monolithic. And, I've had a couple instances as a Black male, Black Republican, not only in this district, but in my travels. And I think people lose sight of that, again, we all come from different backgrounds and have different experiences that shape who we are. But I'm a person just like anyone else, and just trying to do right by my community and make sure that, the voices of our constituents and Bay Staters are heard, to the fullest from both sides.
Thank you. So rapid fire questions, literally 30, 60-second answers to the extent that you can. One question from Ariel. Can you speak, I'll pass this off to Representative Chan. Can you speak to the plausibility of bipartisan challenges of heightening access to long-term care for elders in Massachusetts?
We're all going to grow it at some point. So I think that's the equalizer on bipartisanship. We're all going to age. This is, I think, a combination. I think we talk about the baby boomers a lot. I mean, my mom's generation, and I have personal experience now regarding short-term care, and we're going to work towards long-term care at some point. I mean, this is a reality of lives as caretakers. This is a universal experience. So the bipartisanship issue is less about politics and more about, how do we care for folks, because we're all going to get there ourselves eventually.
Thank you. We're all going to grow old. That should be on the hoodie. Question from Scott. Compromise is key to bipartisanship, yet we see extreme views in both parties, at least at the federal level, which Katie, you sort of alluded to, rejecting compromise as weak or unnecessary. How do you cultivate a culture within your own party to ensure that compromise is valued and rewarded in primaries and general elections? I'm going to pass that question to you, Rep. Vaughn, and also to Katie. 1 minute each.
So I think you make an important point. There's both ends of the spectrum that are highlighted in a lot of the media that we see today, and I think we need to do a better job as individuals within the legislature to make sure we highlight when we are working together, because those feel good stories about the work that we're getting done and the positive work that we're getting done doesn't really make the papers and the social media posts as much as the visceral infighting that we see on the polar opposite ends. So that's one way that we can kind of curb that and make sure that people understand that there's more good that's happening at the state level and the federal level than the type of information that's being spewed at us on a daily basis.
Katie?
Yeah, I would definitely like to build on what the representative just said, because of course the challenge in this is you can only control yourself. You can't control other people. But I do think that I hope that if we as individuals become more involved in our political system, and I say that recognizing there are so many challenges to normal people, jobs, family, childcare, long-term care for other people in your family, all these things that make it hard to get involved. But I think the only thing we can control is ourselves. If we are if we are sort of clicking on, rewarding, reading all of these, posts, tweets, whatever that are, visceral and hate-filled, those are the things that people running for office are going to do more, because it gets them more attention. It gets them into those seats. And I'm not criticizing the people who are running for election. If you're trying to run for election and you're trying to be a respectful person and you're not getting any attention, you're not getting your face out there, your name out there, you're not going to be able to get elected. And then the challenge of that is, of course, if you're an elected official and you don't even really want to do that, but it gets you into the seat, you have to continue doing it to stay in the seat, to get people paying attention to you, to get people paying attention to what you're talking about. So, that's not to blame everything on any one person. I'm saying, it is a lot of individual responsibility. that I think if we are more engaged, we know there's more nuance to policies, to politics, then we are less likely to just respond without even really thinking to tweets, to posts, to articles that are that visceral and that hate-filled. That's because that's what we're dealing with on the federal level in particular. It's just hate-filled. There's no other way to describe it. That wouldn't rise to the top as much if we weren't responding to it. So what we need to be doing is lifting up people who do not follow those practices, who do not spew that rhetoric. That's the real challenge. And then once you get people into those seats, it's debate. We have to have more debate, more opportunities for people to stand up with disparate views, share those views in a respectful manner, as we have to, because there are rules governing how one debates in the legislature, and they're there for a reason, to keep this kind of thing from happening, to keep debate respectful, but vital. That's how we get that, I think.
Let me pop in really fast. I'll say this very simple phrase: fundraising off of fear. You see that everywhere. In the Daily Show, Kimberly uses a reference, but Sarah Silverman was actually talking about the fundraising of fear and the public policy advocacy of fear. And I've watched this a long time. And fear is an effective way for your organization to make money off of people. This is wrong. It's flat out a wrong thing to do to human beings. And it trickles into our world politics. And it's very problematic when people act like every issue means tomorrow's not going to happen. But people make money off of that. And this is the sad state we're in America now.
Thank you. I want to thank our panelists, Representative Tackey Chan, Representative Marcus Vaughn, Katherine Holahan, for their time today. Sorry we could not do this in person given the weather, but I do hope everyone is keeping safe and warm. Thank you to the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University for hosting us, and to our co-sponsors, the Political Science Department, Tufts Action, Tufts Civic, the Tufts Democrats, the Tufts Republicans. And I also want to thank the staff at Tisch College, particularly Jessica and Shenley, for helping put this together. This was your Civic Life lunch on bipartisanship. Next time we will do this with actual lunch. And also thank you to Jane for opening us up today, and best wishes as you graduate and move on into the world. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.